Edward R Murrow is one of the most renowned and distinguished figures in the history of American broadcast journalism. Through the ascendancy of television's popularity in the 1950s, Murrow seized the opportunity to take controversial stances. In doing so, he risked his own reputation for the betterment of American society. Many events added to the pressure which would soon explode into the McCarthy era, the first of which being World War I. It began in August of 1914 and lasted for 4 years. Conflicts arose between the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria, and the Allied Powers, France, Russia, Italy, Britain, and the United States. The war led to the collapse of all 4 Central Powers and changed the map of Europe. It ended with the Treaty of Versailles, which stated that Germany had to take responsibility for starting the war and had to make reparations to certain countries. Immediately after World War I, the first Red Scare struck fear in the hearts of Americans. It occurred due to the success of communism and the establishment of the Soviet Union. The communists wanted to expand their rule by pushing into Western Europe and the USA. Because of the increasing rise of communism in Europe, many Americans feared that their government would be transformed into a communist ruling as well. In 1919, A. Mitchell Palmer was the Attorney General. Palmer researched the presence of communism in the United States. He conducted a series of Palmer raids, which consisted of arresting persons who were suspected of supporting communism on little or no evidence.
The hard-won victory of American arms will prove but a hollow and unavailing triumph if we do not make certain that out of it shall come a greater liberty, a better America, and a surer peace.
By exploiting the natural fear of the people, he became an increasingly popular figure. Shortly thereafter, many alien detainees were deported to countries such as Russia and Finland. World War II arose in 1939 between the Axis powers, consisting of Germany, Italy, and Japan, and the Allies, comprised of Poland, the United Kingdom, China, France, and eventually the United States. A deadlock occurred in 1942, but the war soon turned in the favor of the United States. Japan finally surrendered on September 2, 1945. However, the casualties were not light. 62 million people died, the majority being civilians. The McCarthy era was at its peak from 1950 through 1954, even though it was spurred by the Second Red Scare, which began as early as the 1940s. During this time period, the American people set aside their morals and values and jumped on the bandwagon of anti-communism. Malicious acts of violence, such as witch hunts, swept the country. In 1940, the Alien Registration Act, also known as the Smith Act, was passed. This act made it illegal for anyone to knowingly or willfully advocate, abet, advise, or teach the duty, necessity, desirability, or propriety of overthrowing the government of the United States. In the late 1940s, it became known that a large ring of espionage existed within the government, which frightened Americans. Shortly thereafter, McCarthy gave a 6-hour speech on the Senate floor, during which he accused 200 members working in the State Department of being communists. A large panic ensued, and McCarthy had gained the support of the American people. He gave numerous speeches, each containing names of people whom he believed to be communists.
106 years ago, when this war was declared, you could number the active communists on the fingers of both your hands. As of tonight, the figure is 800 million people. 800 million people. Christianity in 2,000 years has not been that successful.
In 1954, the McCarthy era came to a screeching halt. People such as Edward Murrow began uncovering McCarthy's lies. Murrow became involved with Senator McCarthy through Lieutenant Milo Radulovich. He examined Radulovich's case and became increasingly disturbed with what he found. Murrow had always defended civil liberties, and he disagreed greatly with the bill that Congress was trying to pass that would outlaw the Communist Party. He is quoted as saying, "We can't legislate loyalty." In December of 1951, he allotted 5 minutes of his show to be dedicated to film clips that showed McCarthy bullying other people and treating the press unfairly. Senator McCarthy's especially bad treatment of former Secretary of State General George Catlett Marshall greatly disturbed Murrow. While touring the country with Eisenhower's 1952 presidential campaign, McCarthy accused Marshall of being a traitor and a communist. Even Eisenhower was too afraid to stand up to McCarthy and defend his own mentor. It was after this turning point that Murrow began to compile information against McCarthy. Finally, in October of 1953, Murrow spent an entire episode of his famous show, See It Now, representing the defense of Milo Radulovich. The Army had identified Mr. Radulovich as a security risk because of his sister's and father's previous associations with the communist organization. Milo made a heart-wrenching plea to the American people. "Are my children going to be judged on what their father was labeled? I see a chain reaction that has no end." The show on Milo Radulovich was so successful, Murrow decided to go forward about a show entirely on Senator McCarthy. The CBS executives gave Murrow full control and responsibility over the content of the program. In his report on Senator McCarthy, Murrow is quoted as saying, "Upon what meat doth Senator McCarthy feed? Two of the staples of his diet are the investigation and the half-truth." Murrow showed all of the lying, badgering, and bullying that McCarthy was conducting.
His primary achievement has been in confusing the public mind as between the internal and the external threats of communism. We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty. We must remember always that accusation is not proof, and that conviction depends upon evidence and due process of law.
The public was appalled. Within 48 hours after the show, roughly 13,000 calls came in favor of the show, and only 1,000 calls opposing it. After an initial refusal, McCarthy agreed to the rebuttal time that was offered to him. He spent his half hour calling Murrow a communist and warning the people that they were being taken advantage of. An investigation on Murrow was conducted, but he still stood by his beliefs.
It is necessary to investigate before legislating, but the line between investigating and persecuting is a very fine one, and the junior senator from Wisconsin has stepped over it repeatedly.
The Army trials against McCarthy followed in the wake of the popular support of Murrow's show. In these trials, head attorney Joseph Welch was able to officially end McCarthy's brutal misuse of power with one simple line.
Senator, look, you've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
Murrow's compelling and honest portrayal of McCarthy's behavior abruptly ended the McCarthy era. His courageous words against Joseph McCarthy resonated among the American people.
We will not walk in fear one of another. We will not be driven by fear into an age of unreason if we dig deep in our history and our doctrine, and remember that we are not descended from fearful men.
In following his belief that we should not walk in fear, he changed the course of history. While establishing a new level of broadcast journalism, Edward R Murrow prevented McCarthy from jeopardizing the civil liberties of American citizens. Risking his position and own well-being, Murrow took a stand. Murrow's courage and determination for justice should be appreciated and admired.